Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I am Dr. Douglas Peak, and I am your Salty Pastor. Now, we're going to be doing a new kind of series within the bigger series, okay? And the bigger series has to do with the biggest questions of life and my coaching to help you answer these for yourself and kind of lead you through the various types of questions you need to ask yourself. And once you answer them, man, everything is different. Now, one of the big questions that we've been asking people to ask themselves is, what do I expect my faith to produce in me as it grows? I mean, what's the point of a stronger faith? So often we hear the phrase, my faith needs to be stronger. So, well, that's great. But I'm like, well, how do you know your faith is stronger? Is a strong faith produce in you peace? Does it produce confidence? Does it produce courage? Well, I think it does. And so we've been trying to answer that question. And one of the ways in which you answer that question is you clarify what you believe and why you believe it. And this is why misconceptions and false beliefs are such a big deal. And it's not that you need to believe your entire intellectual, emotional, spiritual, whatever. Well, the term for this is ontological, all of the stuff that makes you, okay? And is like somehow super flawed. It's just that, well, if I want my faith to continue to grow, it's just a lifelong learning process of figuring out, maybe I have some misconceptions that I need to address and get them in line. And what you do is you find that the fruit of the Spirit starts to produce itself more in your life. And so that's what the Salty Pastor is all about. It's about coaching people up in their faith to answer these really big questions and to grow stronger. Now, the series that we're going to do in light of this bigger question, what is your faith supposed to produce in you and how do we deal with misconceptions, is I'm going to Scotland. That's right. I'm going to go to Scotland for 2 or 3 weeks, and my son is taking me. So he and I are going to go over there, have a great time. I'm sure he's planned the itinerary, and we're going to be going to, some really historical spots. I believe we're going to try to figure out if we can find the Loch Ness Monster for one afternoon. I think that we are going to also tour a few Scotch distilleries because it is the birthplace of Scotch. So we're going to get the full experience. And one of the things is that whenever I go someplace, I'd like to really kind of to know kind of the evolution of the culture there. And when you go particularly to Europe, you discover that in many ways it was the seat of Protestant Christianity and how it grew and how our country came into existence is massively influenced by the Protestant Reformation, particularly in England. And I've addressed this before in podcasts past, in years past. I've been doing this podcast now for, 4 or 5 years, I think. It's been a long time. We have well over 500 episodes. And so it's been quite a while. And you can go back and search those. You can go to the website. You can go to the YouTube channel. You can even search them. And I talk about how Congregationalism and where the Pilgrims got their ideology from and what they brought with them when they got to America and how the early colony really set the value basis for the birth of America. It's really quite fascinating history. But I want to know as much as I can about the Scots. And so I want to learn from the Scots, not just to learn things for learning things' sake, but because when I investigate this and I learn things, it teaches me so much about my own faith. And that's why I want to share it with you. Because if your goal is to clarify what you believe and why you believe it, and you don't know where your beliefs were formed on a personal level or where your beliefs came from on a personal level, then how can you understand what you believe and why you believe it, okay? So it's a critical step in the process. I have to go back and say, okay, I believe this. Where did I get it from? Well, I got it from my parents or my grandpa, or maybe I got it. That doesn't make it good, bad, or anything. It just means derivation. This is where it came from. And oftentimes the people before us, our grandparents, great-grandparents, and so forth, were much wiser than people are today. And so, they lived a lot more difficult lives. You think about it, up until about 120 years ago, nobody had ever had a hot shower. And now we take that for granted. You take a hot shower every day. Well, I hope most of my listeners take a shower every day. Not necessary, though, in order to listen and grow in your faith. But that would be my preference. So this is why I love history, though, is because you can look back and you can see how people groups like the Scottish developed their beliefs and how those beliefs drove their convictions, their behavior, their actions, and the decisions that they made. You see, okay, this is what they believed, and this drove them to do these types of things, and these events become historically significant in the direction of future generations. And so what you believe and why you believe it, especially when you look back in history, is a huge deal. It's super important because, events redirected the course of human history many, many, many times, right? There's certain battles and wars. And like, for instance, just take World War II. What if the Nazis weren't defeated and America never landed at Normandy Beach on D-Day and stayed out of the war? Well, today, all of Europe would be under the control of the Third Reich. And talk about a game changer for human history, okay? Well, that's why I love looking back and seeing how core beliefs were developed and how they had an impact on human history. And that what gives me a frame of reference, right? Now, I don't want this to sound like too self-directed, but the main reason you study history and you discover how beliefs impacted the course of human history is because it gives you a frame of reference to see how your beliefs impact the future of your own life. The parallel is unmistakable. When you study history and you understand these things, it gives you a way of thinking and allows you to evaluate your own core beliefs and where they came from. And often, this process makes you stronger. It's a wonderful thing that maybe you look back and you say, my grandparent or my great-grandparents believed this, and then I just believed it. Well, that's wonderful, but you need to do the work that they did, right? Don't ride on their shoulders. You need to stand on your own 2 feet, and you need to focus on, wow, my grandparents believe this for these reasons, right? And it was passed on to me. I need to know the reasons. And what's interesting about that is it not only grows your own faith, because you now can answer the question of why you believe what you believe, but also it connects you to your ancestry. It gives you a sense of rootedness, right? And you go back in history a little bit and you realize how connected you really are to your ancestors. And so that's why I enjoy this, is that you go back, why you believe, where your beliefs came from, and the historical context in which they were developed and then passed on to you is significantly important. And by the way, on a side note, let me rant for a second, this salty rant, and that is, this is why deconstructionism today is a joke. It's rationally bankrupt, simply because it tries to deconstruct a belief without any of the historical context and how beliefs are formed. It's completely dishonest intellectually, in my opinion, as a tool to arrive at any type of truth that can make a significant difference in your life. That's why deconstructionism almost always, 99% of the time, results in what is known as despair or nihilism. It is a meaninglessness because you tear down everything and you have nothing left to believe. Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher. He was he's considered one of the fathers, of postmodern thought and deconstructionism and tearing everything down. And there's a story of how he went to see his mother, who was on her deathbed. She was really ill. And she says, "Why are you here?" And he says, "Well, I came to comfort you." And she says, "How can you comfort me?" He says, "Well, I just wanted you to know you're loved and to give you hope." And she goes, I can't feel love and I have no hope because you've destroyed everything that I believed in. So I have nothing left to believe in. So she's passing away in despair without hope. You see, that's the biggest issue with deconstructionism. It's simply an exercise in arrogance because it pushes you to try to tear apart a belief system without any of the historical context out of which came from it. And the person who articulates the importance of how beliefs are formed throughout historical context better than anybody else? Jordan Peterson. You see? And that's why he has such utter contempt for postmodern thinkers and deconstructionists, okay? Now, sorry, let me get us back on track. The Scottish people are just a wonderful, unique and special kind of people. And the question is, how did they become this way? And what's really interesting is that up until the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, basically they were a tribal-based ethnic group, and they called their tribes clans. Very similar to the Native American or Indian tribes here in America when our founding fathers and pilgrims came over. The Scottish clans all lived in what is commonly known as the Highlands, okay, up in the mountains. And they're the ones who had a very unique cultural expression, and they spoke Gaelic. And one of the side notes is that Gaelic was rarely written down. And unfortunately, that was the cause of its demise. But that's for another time, another place to discuss that. It's a fascinating historical deep dive. So I really enjoy it, but not everybody does. And I'm here to help you grow in your faith. Now, Scotland, you have to understand, from 1550 up until 17, I can't remember what it was, 40 or whatever, at the Battle of Culloden. Now, if you go to England, the Battle of Culloden is a massive battle, and it was the Jacobites against the British Army. The British Army went up there, absolutely destroyed them, and that was basically the end of any attempt for future generations of having an independent Scotland. Now, what's really interesting, and a lot of people don't know this, is that the Jacobites were Catholic, and some of them were Episcopalians, but mostly they were Catholics, okay? And they came from the clans that lived in the Highlands. So almost all the Jacobites came from the clans that lived in the Highlands. But in Scotland, there are two separate groups that are considered Scottish. One is the Highlanders, and the other is the lowlanders, okay? And those are the people that live in the cities and the towns and so forth. And so what's interesting is if you ever watch a show that's out, I haven't seen much of it, but it's called Outlander, and it kind of drops you into the history of the Scottish people at the Jacobites trying to rally themselves around, I believe it was King James. They were all loyal to him, and they wanted him to become the King of England and the King of Scots. But in this show, it just kind of, tells a little bit of the history of it. So that kind of gives you a little bit of context for this. But what you don't get in the show and you don't understand is that in Scotland, there were two groups of people. They don't do a very good job of explaining, at least in the first year of some of the episodes I saw. And that is that Scotland was made up of two very distinct groups of people. And that is the Jacobites, who were Catholic, and then you had the Presbyterian Kirks, okay? And Kirk is kind of Scottish slang for church, right? And these two groups did not get along at all, because they not only had a political disagreement, they also had a theological one, okay? Now, the Presbyterian Kirks didn't believe in a king necessarily, and they didn't believe in church authority like bishops and a pope and all that stuff. Back then, the argument was, were you a papist or not? And the reason why is because Catholics had a pope, and then the Church of England, Episcopalians, they also kind of have a pope, right? And the head of the Church of England, the Anglican Church, but outside of the UK, it's called the Episcopalians, all right? And what happened is they also have a pope, right? And at the time when the Reformation started, it was the King of England, and now it is the Prince of, it's not the Prince of Wales. It's I can't remember. Prince Charles was the head of the church when his mom was still the queen, right? And so it's I apologize for not being as well versed on my political UK or British monarchies than I should be right now, but because that's not the point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get us off track. I want to get us back on track, and that is that. The Kirks, though, believed they are the Church of Scotland, right? So it's the Kirk, and they didn't believe in bishops or a pope or one person with church authority. What they believed in was that the Kirk should be an elected body of people that led the church called elders. And so Presbyterian Kirks, or the Kirk of Presbyterian, the Church of Scotland, right, was heavily influenced by Calvin's theology. And Calvin saw the Catholic Mass as a service of blasphemy. And the reason he thought this, and the Kirks thought this, is because the Catholic Mass focused around the Eucharist, and they believed in this thing called transubstantiation. And what that basically meant is, as the priest is going through the liturgy and all the steps that he takes, the communion, the Eucharist that they take, the Lord's Supper, actually transubstantiates. It actually becomes biologically, in this reality, the blood of Jesus Christ. Okay, the blood and flesh of Jesus. It's called transubstantiation. That's what they believe. And so because of that, the belief was, according to Calvin and the Kirks, is that you're re-sacrificing Christ. You're trying to re-sacrifice him over and over again. And they believe this was contrary to the statement in Hebrews chapter 10, which I have been focusing on a little bit prior to this week's podcast, the book of Hebrews, not Hebrews 10. But in Hebrews 10, it says that Jesus Christ's sacrifice was sufficient once for all. So it only needed to happen once. It happened with Jesus, never needs to happen again. So they felt that that was a blasphemous thing because you're trying to sacrifice Jesus, so to speak. The Presbyterian Kirk also believed that all of the images, relics, and saints' devotions, devotion to saints and to Mary were a form of idolatry, okay? And that violated the second commandment. Now, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what the Presbyterian Kirks taught and believed at the time, right, in the 1600s. Now, they believed that it's called the episcopacy, and it comes from a Greek word in the New Testament, episkopos. And episkopos means ruling elder, right? And so the Presbyterian Kirks believed that Episcopalians and Catholics were a threat because they wanted a single ruler and authority over the church, religion, and politically as well. And then you have the Stuarts, and this is where the Jacobites were supporting King James the Seventh, I think. I think it was the Seventh. Anyway, their open Catholicism confirmed Presbyterian fears. So the Presbyterians were fearful of the James that wanted to reascend the throne, supported by the Jacobites, right? because they felt that that would enslave the Scottish people to Rome all over again. So if you go back and you look at these sermons that were preached over the probably 1650 to 1750, when you hit the Culloden battle, the Battle of Culloden, and where the Jacobites tried to finally win their independence, there was a lot of sermons preached by Scottish pastors in the towns that cast the Jacobites, the people in the Highlands, as enemies of the gospel, and they called them allied with the Antichrist. So isn't that interesting? And so the end result of this, so let me kind of break it down for you here, is that Jacobites, according to the Presbyterian Kirk, were not just wrong politically, they were wrong spiritually, because they were in rebellion against the true church revealed in the New Testament. Now, the other side of it was the Jacobites. These are Catholics, right? And they believed that the Presbyterian Kirks were rebelling against God's order. The Catholics believed in a hierarchical church with bishops rooted in what is called apostolic succession. I don't know if you know this, but even today, the Pope in Roman Catholicism has what is known as revelatory authority. So when the Pope issues an edict, it has the same weight as the New Testament scriptures. And so the Catholics believed in this apostolic succession, because how is it that a Pope today can issue a edict that has the same power and authority as the scriptures? Well, because the Pope is in the apostolic succession of Peter. So they see Peter as the first Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, okay? So they saw Presbyterian Kirk, they'd abolished all the bishops. They set up a church run by elders that were elected. So if you're a Jacobite and you're a Catholic, this looked like chaos. It looked like a rejection of God-ordained authority. That was their perspective. And they also, the Jacobites, kind of believed that the Presbyterians were way too strict. They forbid celebrations, dancing. They would police morality. You weren't allowed to drink, anything. And if you're a Highland Scotch, right? I mean, if you're a Scottish Highlander and you can't drink and dance, and what's the purpose of life? It doesn't make any sense. So they just saw this moralism and purity is just absurd, restrictive. Then finally they said, look, if you rebel against the king, they believed in the Jacobites believed in what they called the divine right of kings. And so that kings were appointed by God. And so therefore these types of people with the bloodlines could only have a legitimate claim to a throne. And if you reject that, you're rejecting God, because this is the way God decided to do it. So they saw the Presbyterian Kirk as schematic, meaning they created divisions that shouldn't be there. They saw them as very self-righteous rebels who were tearing the church as well as the kingdom of England apart, all under the guise of purity. So this is why you had a spiritual clash, okay, in these two groups. For the Presbyterian Kirk, Jacobism or Jacobites meant idolatry, popery, or they were papists, and they betrayed the whole point of the Reformation. Then for the Jacobites, they saw the Presbyterian Kirk as rebels filled with heresy, and they were betraying God's ordained order. And here's the irony of it. Both sides claimed true Christianity, that they claimed that we are protecting authentic Christianity from corruption. So they both claimed that their motivation for what they were doing was exactly the same. So that's the irony of this history. You have the Presbyterian Kirk, and you have then on top of that, the Jacobites. Now, we look back and you'll also see something else that happened. And that is, even though the Jacobites initially were stronger because they had all the clans in the highlands, they did not emphasize literacy. Whereas the Presbyterian Kirk made it mandatory. And today, the Scottish people are they have one of the highest literary rates in the world. And what's really fascinating about Scotland is that in 1550, I'll dig into this, show you the charts, but in 1550, right after the Reformation, less than like 5% of men could read or write in Scotland. And you fast forward within just one generation, by the 1600s, so from over the next 50 years, that rose to almost 30%. And then by 1650, amongst the Presbyterian Kirks, the lowlanders, you had well over 70% that could read. And what were you required to read? The Bible. And so that is something so interesting, because even though the Presbyterian Kirks tended to be overemphasizing moral purity and these other things and missing the boat a little bit, that seemed to be irrelevant, because what they were emphasizing was knowing the Bible and reading it for yourself. And that creates a level of independence. I think it gives some development of confidence in faith when you can go read the Bible for yourself, and it becomes a living and wonderful interaction between you, the Holy Spirit, and God. So that's what history teaches us, just when we look back between these two groups of people and what happened. And today, it's very important to note, particularly after the Battle of Culloden, is the Jacobites and the Catholicism in Scotland pretty much came to an end. And so now you have the Church of Scotland, otherwise known as a Kirk, that is the predominant influence throughout all of Scotland. And so I think that's really important to understand. Well, I'm going to close here today because I think it's a great place to leave off. Love the history. I hope you're doing it. I hope to share a lot of visuals with you that I am recording currently right now as I spend time in Scotland. So I just want to say, God bless you. Remember, what you believe is one of the most important things about you.